Chapter 21. Upon seeing the great walls of Helmgart, I finally felt a sense of relief, even if only for a few minutes. I knew a long day still awaited us. A very long day. The tension from the mission, the paranoia about the Britannians, and the constant concern for the bodies we were carrying had drained me more than I wanted to admit. But just being back in Helmgart, surrounded by the fortress's safety, gave me a moment of peace. The guards let us through without much trouble, perhaps thinking we were just a returning patrol or something of the sort. Not a force crawling back from a failed mission, barely holding together. We didn't have time to waste. We began the steep ascent toward Helmgart's keep. "Who goes there?" shouted one of the guards at the fortress gate, watching us. "Albrecht von Rainsfield, squire in service to the Margrave von Mackensen." I called back, though my voice held none of the strength it had when we left the camp. "You weren't supposed to be out in Britannian territory. We received no orders about it." The guard shouted again, his tone clearly suspicious. "The Britannians threw everything at us. Knights, men-at-arms, even peasants. What you see here is all that remains," I replied bluntly, knowing there was no need to hide the truth. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he began giving orders, probably doubting what I had just told him. The gate began to creak open. "You may enter. The Margrave will want to hear what happened," the guard finally said, and the doors opened wide. As we entered, chaos quickly erupted around us. The noble families under the Margrave's protection, who resided in the keep, came rushing in, weeping for their dead and demanding the return of their loved ones' bodies and armor. The sound of their sobs and cries filled the air as some of the nobles approached, hoping to find their kin, or at least something belonging to them. Luckily, I had taken the time to mark the bodies, listing their features and names where possible. Most recognized the faces of the fallen and carried them off to perform proper funeral rites, thanking me for bringing them home. Eventually, the knights arrived. "Albrecht von Rainsfield, the Margrave wishes to speak with you," said one knight, pointing the way. "Hey, that one's mine. No one touches his body, armor, or sword," I said, turning to look at the captain standing like a statue and pointing to the body of the Grail Knight. I began following the knight, the metallic clink of his armor echoing through the familiar halls of the fortress. The familiarity brought a brief comfort, though it vanished quickly as the weight of the situation returned. At last, we reached the chamber where the Margrave usually spent his hours reviewing maps and plans. His son Joachim, his brother, and several knights were already seated at the table. The Margrave had his hands over his face, visibly overwhelmed and unwilling to believe what had happened. "Albrecht, sit," the Margrave said, barely containing his anger, motioning to a chair. I sat in silence, waiting for him to begin. I knew the consequences of our mission wouldn't be easy to explain. "What the hell happened? Why is everyone dead?" the Margrave asked through clenched teeth, his frustration palpable. "We were attacked," I replied, staring him straight in the eyes, trying to stay calm. "I know that already. Damn it. But why did everyone die? What happened?" he pressed, making those around him visibly nervous. For a time, everything was fine. We burned 3 Britannian camps, killed everyone inside, captured several horses and noble armor. But just when things seemed calm, a Grail Knight appeared, I said, recalling the events. "You've got to be joking," muttered the Margrave's brother, covering his face with one hand in disbelief. The Margrave stared at me intensely, and the fury in his eyes began to fade, replaced by suspicion. "And how exactly did you survive, Albrecht?" he asked, practically overflowing with disbelief. "Because we won the battle," I said firmly. "Almost all the soldiers died. We were left with no officers, but we still managed to drive the Britannians back. Especially after I put a chunk of lead in that Grail Knight's chest and face. The bastard was tough. Killed 8 knights by himself." You killed a Grail Knight?" The Margrave's eyes widened in disbelief. His face was a mixture of awe and shock. "Of course I did," I replied without hesitation. "His body is outside. Do you really think that monster would have let us leave if he were still alive? No chance. Thanks to that, we managed to perform a quick rite for the dead and fled as fast as we could." I tried to keep speaking, but the Margrave was already barking orders. "Bring me the body. I want to see it with my own eyes. Ha, ha, ha. I'll have the Duke of Montfort on his knees begging for that corpse back. By Sigmar, finally some good news." The Margrave laughed, and his grin lit up the whole chamber. "So, how many Britannians did you kill in the battle?" Sigmar as my witness, I've no idea, I answered truthfully. There were too many. They outnumbered us easily. I personally fired my arquebus more than 40 times, so I'd guess a lot more than that. At least I brought back the bodies of the fallen nobles. Really? Well done, Albrecht. The Margrave was still smiling, clearly pleased. I suppose we'll have to send a priest of Moor to sanctify the battlefield. He'll be thankful you showed such concern for the dead. Don't worry. I'll make sure the families reward you properly for your actions today. The Margrave looked quite pleased at first, but suddenly his expression changed. His face shifted from euphoria to visible anger. His eyes narrowed as he scratched his head, like he was trying to make sense of it all. And how the hell am I supposed to explain this to the Emperor? He said with clear frustration, staring at the floor like it was an unsolvable puzzle. As for the soldiers, we can report a series of skirmishes and, began the Margrave's brother, trying to find a quick way out. Not that, idiot. That's the least of our problems. We'll just recruit more from the local towns and refill the ranks. That's easy? The Margrave snapped, clearly irritated, then let out a heavy sigh. I mean, Albrecht, he shouldn't even be a squire. And here he is, killed who knows how many Britannians, slew a Grail Knight, and brought back the bodies of the nobles. Every single act qualifies as major chivalry. His voice trailed off, the weight of what he was saying visibly overwhelming him. The room went silent for a moment, everyone staring at the Margrave, waiting for some sort of solution. But, Joachim began, his tone hesitant. You should knight him, father. The Margrave sighed again, his face still twisted in frustration. Normally that would be the right thing to do, even for far less. But I can't just knight a 10-year-old squire. What the hell am I going to tell the other nobles? It'll look like I made all of this up, he said with a mix of anger and resignation. Speaking of which, I have no idea how ransom works. Can I keep the knight's sword? I asked the Margrave. No, said the Margrave immediately, his tone firm. The Britannians always demand the full package. Body, armor, sword, and horse when they ask for ransom. They don't accept partial returns, especially in this case. A Grail Knight is, I think they're religious figures or something. This is more of a political victory than anything else. The Duke of Montfort and the neighboring dukes will have to come negotiate for the body of the Grail Knight. That's when we squeeze them, but not too much. Push them too far, and they'll go to war just to recover the body if they think we're desecrating it. So the answer to your question is no, he said, shutting down my attempt to keep a piece of loot. Damn it. Just when I thought I'd get to keep a sword that cuts through steel, I muttered, annoyed. Believe me, it's much better than having Britannian knights chasing you down for what you did, replied the Margrave with a barely perceptible smile. I'll see what I can do now. I'll consult with the Emperor and figure out how to handle this. Like I said, knighthood is nearly impossible. Maybe they'll take an interest and offer you a post in the Reichsguard. Well, if you say so, Margrave, I won't argue. You're the one with experience here. Anyway, how much is my father getting from the Grail Knight ransom? I asked, trying to cut the interrogation short and change the topic. I'll only charge you for acting as diplomat, the Margrave replied in a lighter tone. I'm going to get a good chunk from the Duke of Montfort and send it to your father accordingly. And of course, with my thanks for this opportunity. I assume you're tired, so someone take him to one of the guest rooms to rest. Thanks, and maybe give something to the soldiers who helped me carry the bodies back. Because it wasn't easy convincing them to cooperate, I said before turning toward the door. It shall be done, the Margrave nodded. As I stepped out of the chamber, I saw the Margrave hurrying toward the courtyard, eager to see the body of the Grail Knight for himself. I followed the knight, and to my fortune, I didn't have to sleep in my usual room. Instead, I was given a large chamber, unworthy of a noble perhaps, but clearly built to be comfortable. I slept like the damned. No one woke me, so I must have slept off all the exhaustion from those grueling days of marching. The fatigue had completely overtaken me, and my body had finally found the rest it so desperately needed. The following days were filled with more nuisances than I would have liked. Several noble sons and relatives of the fallen knights approached me to thank me for bringing their bodies back. As word spread of the attack's catastrophe, more emphasis was placed on how my actions had been decisive in retrieving their sons' remains. The long negotiations to recover Britannian bodies could have taken days, maybe even weeks, if not for my intervention. Banquets and feasts turned into political theater. A headache, really. I just had to sit there, smile, say it wasn't a problem, and pretend anyone else would have done the same in that situation. The following week, a Britannian duke arrived at the Helmgart. I had to be present at that negotiation for the Grail Knight's body. When he was told that a squire had killed the Grail Knight, the duke couldn't hide his red face. Clearly ashamed, clearly disbelieving. That a mere squire had slain one of the lady's chosen paladins was nearly unthinkable to him, and the restrained fury in his expression was unmistakable. By the end of the day, after a long and tense negotiation, the duke offered 1,500 crowns for the return of the Grail Knight's body, with armor and weapons intact. The price was far more than I had expected, so father will be able to pay off some debts early. And with that, my future finances are finally clean. Chapter 22. Damn it! This itches like hell. How the hell do you stand this torture? I said, looking at Joachim while adjusting the shirt they had lent me for the banquet. What are you talking about, Albrecht? That's comfortable clothing. It's silk from Tilia, extremely expensive, Joachim replied, glancing around with a satisfied expression. How can this be comfortable? I muttered, trying to soften the hard shoes I was wearing. This is more like punishment. Well, get used to it, Joachim replied, unfazed. I don't know how the hell you killed that Britannian, but now you've got to live with the consequences. It was one thing to be a cupbearer at these celebrations, where I only had to stay still and avoid attracting attention from the nobles and their nonsense. But now I was trapped, turned into the center of attention. The Margrave had arranged a feast to celebrate the victory over Britannia, taking advantage of the fact that the Duke of Montfort had declared that the attack had been initiated by his forces and that their defeat had come at the hands of the Empire. The Margrave was so pleased he decided to throw a huge celebration, and of course I was now caught in it, being observed by the entire Helmgart court. The nobles looked delighted, and I felt completely out of place, barely fitting in this world no matter how noble my birth might be. I didn't like being at the center of it all, between the music, the noise, and the laughter. I could ignore all that if they would just ignore me, but they didn't. All eyes were on me, everyone eager to hear how I had killed one of Britannia's knights. I just pulled the trigger, though surviving long enough to do it was the real achievement, I said while following Joachim, who was heading over to watch some of the dances. Typical von Rainsfeld stuff, huh? Said Joachim, pausing for a second, clearly holding back an insult. Yeah, but I don't get why your father is so set on throwing this party. The victory over the Britannians was months ago. If he wanted to mock the Duke of Montfort, that time has passed, I said while watching some of the strange dances being performed. It's never too late to celebrate. Besides, we were waiting for something, Joachim said with a smile that didn't convince me at all. Waiting for what? I asked him. Wait and see, he said, wearing a very fake smile. Blessings of Sigmar, noble Albrecht, said a voice behind me. Turning around, I found a finely dressed woman, accompanied by an elegant maid and a young girl nervously holding an embroidered handkerchief. Young von Rainsfeld, allow me to present my daughter, Miss Elisa. Her father, Baron Luxemburg, is a good friend of your honorable father. He has heard of your unusual bravery. Elisa, my dear, go on, the mother said, smiling and stepping back. Really? A friend of my father? Miracles do exist, I said, staring straight at the mother. Blessings of Sigmar, Albrecht. I heard of your great feat. It must have been a tremendous display of courage, said the daughter, handing me the embroidered handkerchief. My lady, forgive this uncultured brute. As you can see, due to his young age, he doesn't fully understand the etiquette of these events, Joachim said, taking the handkerchief and placing it in one of my pockets, leaving the heraldry clearly visible. Ha ha, it must all be so sudden, noble servant of Sigmar. I was wondering if you'd like to join me in viewing Helmgart's gardens. They're beautiful this time of year, and I could show you around, Elisa said. I know them very well. For the past few years, I've been the one maintaining them, especially the rose bushes, I replied, trying to escape the situation. Then you could show me. I'd love to hear about how you cared for such a magnificent and beautiful garden. She insisted again. No, I can't leave, since I'm a guest of honor. Perhaps another day. It wouldn't be proper to abandon an event so carefully prepared by our noble host. I couldn't dishonor him by leaving early, I replied again, trying to shut it down. I understand. I hope we can speak soon, she said, putting on a sad face before walking away with her mother, the maid following behind. So this is what you meant, having to endure all this? I asked, looking at Joachim. It's not that bad. I highly doubt they're actually friends with your father. Your father has no friends, only people who fear him or people he must obey. But they're clearly trying to get close to you. Baron Luxemburg has lost much of his wealth supporting political careers, so I'd bet they've already got that information on hand, Joachim said. What information? I asked again, confused. You'll find out soon enough. But know this, there are families that see you as a chest full of gold. 11 years old and already a distinguished soldier. Many families would love to tie you down, including my own. Later this afternoon, after the event, you'll be introduced to my cousin. Though, well, between us, she's quite ugly. That probably explains why she's still unmarried. So brace yourself. It won't be easy, especially with how much you hate all this, said Joachim. Well, if it cheers you up, Father's planning a spring campaign to clear the orcs from the mountains. There have been some attacks, so it's necessary to deal with the Green Menace. He'll definitely send you along. And me too, of course. Though it's a bad omen that your last knight died under your watch, but still, I'd rather have you at my side knowing you're not the type to flee. You just become a lot more dangerous, Joachim said. I'll need more gunpowder. I ran out after my trip through Britannia, so I'll have to visit an alchemist. I've gotten the hang of my arquebus. Apparently, it takes a few practice shots to really understand how the bullets move through the air, I replied. Stop by the alchemist and stock up on vials, but make sure they're properly sealed. If it rains, your powder's useless, and that's not great when fighting orcs. So make sure you're well prepared, Joachim said. This is all so awful, I muttered, feeling someone approaching from behind again. Albrecht, said a familiar voice. Good. The Emperor's envoy has arrived, added the Margrave. I turned quickly and saw the Margrave, dressed in elaborate garments adorned with the emblems of his house. So what happens now? I have an idea of what's going on, but I've no clue what I'm supposed to do, I said with a slight smile. Yes, that's why I'm here, Albrecht, to explain things so you don't stand there with a dumb look on your face while they're giving you the honors. You will treat the Emperor's envoy with utmost respect, always addressing him as my lord or your lordship. Always give thanks to me, to the Emperor, and to Sigmar for the honor of serving the Empire, and once again to Sigmar for protecting us in battle, said the Margrave. Your father and I spent a long time in Altdorf. The Emperor recommended that you be knighted, but he himself said it will happen when you turn 15. He'll personally knight you then, and you'll be given an immediate position in the Reichsguard, so you won't have to go through the usual squireship process. You'll become a member of the Emperor's Guard the moment you turn 15. For that reason, the Emperor will gift you a young demigriffin when you join the Reichsguard, so we'll need to continue your training diligently. There's been talk about gifting you a runic sword from our friends in the mountains, but that will depend on how many the Emperor receives. Many nobles are waiting on one, and the Emperor made promises. That's what's set aside for you, the Margrave said, looking straight at me. Great. A glorified bodyguard, I thought. Generous rewards indeed, Margrave, I replied with a wide smile. Yes, as for your father, the Emperor granted him some lands that were under his direct control. They're not worth much, just forests without villages. Not much use there. He also gave a generous payment in gold, but as I understand it, it was used to pay off the debts your father had accumulated, those he incurred to gain support and bribe officials for his mining rights. He was also granted toll rights for road usage toward Marienburg. And since there was a major political movement in the capital, the Emperor intervened and granted colonization rights on his lands, with the support of several elector counts and nobles present at court. He may now inform his freemen that they may travel to his territories to establish new settlements, in exchange for being tax-exempt for the next decade. The Margrave concluded. I guess father must have been pleased, I asked, as I hadn't seen him in some time. Yes, regarding you, he was proud. He wouldn't stop talking about how Sigmar had finally given him the heir he always wanted. Strange, considering your older brother is still alive. That's when he'd get angry. He spent a lot of time talking to judges about a deal to disinherit your older brother, said the Margrave with a grimace. Well, it's something he always mentioned. My brother's more of a bookworm. He never liked any of that, I said, recalling father's constant complaints. All right then, to your seat of honor, and do as I told you, said the Margrave, pointing toward the banquet table. I slid into the chair, adopting a posture of readiness, while everything around me carried on. Music still echoed, and the dancers moved with grace. But something shifted immediately when the Emperor's envoy entered the hall. The music stopped abruptly, and the dancing ceased at once. Every eye turned toward him, watching in silence the man who bore the Emperor's emblems. The silence was deep, almost tangible, like the air itself had thickened with expectation. The envoy, exuding solemn presence, ordered me to rise. His voice rang out in the hall as he unrolled a long scroll, which he began reading aloud. With an imposing tone, he recited words I already knew, what the Margrave had told me earlier, that the Emperor would knight me at 15, and that I would be granted a demi-griffin. He deliberately omitted the part about the runic sword. He also spoke of my father, publicly detailing the same news the Margrave had already shared: the lands, the toll rights, the gold, and the colonization rights in the mining settlements. At the end, I gave thanks as I had been instructed, bowing, invoking Sigmar's name, waiting to see the envoy's reaction. Apparently satisfied with my response, he nodded in approval, and the ceremony continued. After the reading, I was quickly surrounded by the local nobility and guests. They repeated the same ritual I had seen before, mothers and fathers pushing their daughters forward to hand me embroidered handkerchiefs marked with their family heraldry, each trying in their own way to stand out and catch my attention, all under the constant gaze of their servants. It was clear this was political strategy beneath a thin veil of courtesy. As conversations bloomed, subtle tensions started to rise. The nobles competed quietly among themselves, dropping veiled insults and snide remarks, each trying to undermine the others. More than one tried to find a way to speak with me about future engagements, eager to use their position. My name was already well known, and my father's reputation carried weight. His foul temper was infamous throughout Reichland, so it was better to talk to me than to him. Hours passed. While everyone kept playing their little political games, I just kept smiling, pretending to be interested in their words while quietly thinking about how to escape this torture. Best not to talk too much for now, and wait for things to settle down. Finally, after endless chatter, I returned to my seat, hoping for a moment of peace. But my rest didn't last long. At the door, a knight appeared, covered in dust and mud. His presence clashed starkly with the elegant atmosphere, and immediately, all eyes turned to him. He paused for a moment, then without hesitation, walked straight toward me. The Margrave's face tensed at once, visibly angered by the interruption. The knight, after a few seconds of silence, removed his helmet, revealing his face. I recognized him instantly, though he looked different. It was Rudolf, one of my father's knights, but with grayer hair and eyes full of exhaustion. Standing before me, he bowed deeply and knelt. "My lord," he said, taking a long breath before continuing, "your lord Father Moore has claimed his soul." Chapter 23. Calm down. Calm down. Don't get excited. You have to look grieved. I can't look like a madman celebrating my father's death in public, I thought, struggling to suppress the rush of anxiety building inside me. My heart was pounding, and I felt warmth in my ears, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. The Margrave, visibly surprised, frowned and stared at me. "What happened?" He looked fine when I last saw him in the capital," he said, with a mix of disbelief and confusion. "I don't know all the details truly. Forgive me, my lord. I failed your father. He was killed by bandits on his way back from Altdorf," Rudolf answered, his eyes puffy and nearly red, clearly shaken. "But you're still breathing. What happened?" I asked, staring at him, unable to hide my need for answers. "I never, my lord. I would never. We were brothers in arms. We fought together, bled together, won and lost together. By Sigmar, I swear, if it had been in my power, I would have given my life to save your father," said Rudolf, his voice nearly breaking, emotion pouring through every word. "Then explain it. How is it possible that he's dead and you're here claiming innocence?" said the Margrave, now clearly irritated, his jaw clenched tight. "Your father," Rudolf said, swallowing hard. "He ordered me to return to Rainsfeld ahead of him to start processing purchase orders for materials and tools for a new village project funded by the Margrave's gold. Almost all of his escort left 3 days before his departure. He remained behind with 2 knights to handle unfinished matters with his son Heinrich. He was supposed to return 3 days later after finalizing everything with the judge. And he did. We found his body near the road to Rainsfeld when we went to meet him, surrounded by mutilated corpses, what appeared to be bandits," Rudolf explained, clearing his throat, as if the weight of the words made them harder to speak. The Margrave fell silent, lost in thought, staring at the floor as he processed the information. "Many things come to mind about what could have happened," he finally said in a grave tone. "Like what?" I asked, keeping a serious face but letting a faint hint of false grief show. Your brother, a jealous noble, an angry merchant, bitter peasants, too many motives. Your father wasn't loved. He was feared and respected for it. He's one of the few nobles I know who's never had a peasant rebellion under his rule, because he always fulfilled his duty of protection. But the von Kesselheims may have seen their claim to your lands in jeopardy. It's a possibility, said the Margrave, glancing toward the surrounding nobles, whose hushed whispers already betrayed their awareness of what was happening. What about Heinrich? Any suspicion? I asked, looking at Rudolf for more answers. No. In fact, they were getting along for the first time. Surprised me when I saw them. They reached an agreement. Heinrich would be disinherited, and in return, your father would pay for a full university education in Altdorf. Heinrich would renounce his claim and even give up his surname. So, Rudolf began, before being interrupted by the Margrave. It makes no sense. If he agreed to that before a judge, his case is dead. He wouldn't gain anything from the murder. So, was the Baron's body desecrated? The Margrave asked, his stare sharp, his words slicing through the air like a blade. No, untouched. As I said, we found him surrounded by bandits. I think he killed them all. But he was so badly wounded that he succumbed to his injuries. His purse, his sword, his armor, they were all intact. It wasn't a robbery. Or if it was, he killed every last one of them. We found his body seated against a tree, explained Rudolf, his voice trembling more with each word. Whoever did it got away with it, I suppose? I said, clenching my fists and teeth. Though inside I was far too pleased with the outcome. No one could challenge my inheritance now. The sole heir to 3 villages, a small castle, the gold I had stashed away, father's coffers, and all the minerals waiting in the Grey Mountains. Especially with no chains. Well, first I needed to deal with the Margrave. Your father was too brave, perhaps? Didn't make the wisest decision, said the Margrave, grimacing as he spoke, like he couldn't quite fit the pieces together. Certainly, I said, breathing audibly. Margrave Reinhardt, I know this banquet is partly in my honor, but I must beg you to allow me to take my leave, both from this noble gathering and from your service. I said, my voice tinged with sorrow, though carefully restrained. Why? We must finish your training. You can assign someone to manage your lands while you pursue a brilliant future. I know this is a dreadful moment, but you can't throw it all away. Do you have any idea how many people would kill to have their son in the Reichsguard, with imperial recommendation and imperial gifts? Said the Margrave, raising an eyebrow, almost as if trying to make me see what I was giving up. I wish to say goodbye to my father, Margrave. I need to. I want to see him before the priests of Moor bury him in his garden. I couldn't rest easy knowing that. I can't even remember his face, I said, forcing myself to shed a tear. I saw the Margrave grimace, clearly reluctant to let me leave. Very well, but you must return once it's done. Your father would have wanted you in the Reichsguard, the Margrave said, his voice trying to sound firm but laced with concern. Thank you very much, your lordship. My journey will be swift. I hope to return soon, I replied, rising from my chair with purpose. Head to the stables. Rudolf will leave as soon as possible, I said, just as I turned to head toward my room. I quickly removed the garments that had been driving me insane, the elegant noble attire that made me feel like a caged animal, and put on servant's clothes, the only ones that still felt comfortable. I had grown so much over the past years that the clothes I arrived with no longer fit. They hung off my shoulders like ornaments. As for noble garments, forget it, nothing fit right anymore. I didn't take long to come out carrying the chest with all the wealth I had accumulated, and once I met with Rudolf, we headed for the stables. As I mounted my horse, I found the rest of my father's men-at-arms. Like Rudolf, they were covered in dust, their horses muddied. They all looked at me with eyes full of guilt, as if waiting for me to blame them for my father's death. We immediately began the journey back, stopping only to rest in the lands of other nobles, who allowed us to sleep in their guest quarters. The guards who accompanied me were on edge, like hawks, reacting violently to any potential threat. They barely strayed far from me whenever the road neared dense woods. The fear of another ambush kept them tense, and the shadows beneath the trees always seemed more menacing than they really were. It wasn't long before we crossed the river again and continued riding toward Rainsfeld. As we reached the forest's edge, all the men-at-arms came to a halt. Rudolf rode closer, wearing a serious, almost grim expression. "This is where it happened, my lord. This is where we found your father," the knight said, pointing to an open area within the trees. I dismounted and walked toward the spot he indicated. The air was heavy with the same desolation I had been avoiding throughout the journey. The bark on several trees was scarred, clearly where a great sword had struck with force. Though the scene was calm now, the traces of what had happened still lingered. However, after so many days, it would be impossible to determine exactly what had occurred. All that remained was the fact that whoever had killed my father had gotten away with it. Nothing else? Is there nothing more we can do here? I said, turning to Rudolph and the others. Let's go home, I ordered, spurring my horse sharply to leave the area as quickly as possible. An hour later, we reached the village and the progress was visible. There were more houses than I remembered, a good sign that the settlement had grown in recent years. In the distance, I saw a large building on the village outskirts, likely a new business, given the number of wagons parked outside and the size of the structure. At least, the town seemed to be thriving. Though it was already night, we didn't hesitate to head for the Temple of Mor, located just beyond the village. We passed through the stone walls that surrounded the graveyard, another measure to ensure privacy for funeral rites. Silence reigned as we entered, and the priests of Mor received us without a word, guiding us down into the crypt beneath the temple. Only a single candle lit the way, casting long shadows and creating an oppressive, grim atmosphere. Eventually, we reached a stone door. The priest began unlocking it, removing a seal and turning a series of hidden mechanisms, gesturing for me to step inside. It was clearly the family crypt, as I saw several tombs carved with the names of my ancestors. Everything was wrapped in a thick silence that seemed to weigh in the air. At the center stood a stone slab. Upon it lay my father's body, covered in familiar colored cloths and adorned with the family heraldry. His great sword rested on his chest, and his armor was laid carefully over the fabrics, as if he were still ready for battle. May Mor guide your father's soul to the eternal garden, and may the crow lift the weight of despair from you. Will you keep vigil, young lord? Said the priest of Mor, his voice muted and respectful, though filled with a reverence that felt unfamiliar to me. No, seal it. Let his soul rest forever in Mor's garden, I answered firmly, my gaze fixed on my father's body. The cultists of Mor moved quickly. They shifted a part of the stone table to lift the body together, taking my father and placing him in his tomb. When the tomb was closed, sealed, and covered, the cultists began reciting prayers and placing protective wards against necromancy, ensuring that nothing could disturb his rest. In Mor's shadow, we are all equal, but your father was a man of duty, and his name will not be lost in the mist of forgetfulness, said the priest as he set the final nameplate on my father's grave. I stood there, watching in silence. The last seal was set, and finally I stepped back. The priests sealed the crypt once more, and the darkness that had already begun to swallow the place closed in entirely. As I exited the crypt, my guard was waiting for me. Will you return to Helmgart tomorrow, my lord? Rudolph asked, guiding me back to the castle. No, I don't plan to go back, I said with a smile. But my lord, your education. You're still too young to take on your duties and, Rudolph said, clearly worried. I don't need a regency, or anyone managing my estate. I'm finally free, and I'm going to rule even better than father ever did, I said, smiling. Chapter 24. I looked at the monster heads and armor decorating the walls. It wasn't anything I didn't expect, but seeing the head of a minotaur hanging there, accompanied by a painting of my father in his youth defeating the beast, left me speechless. Damn, he killed a minotaur, I muttered to myself, watching how his younger face stood firm in the painting, while the creature's severed head hung above it. So this is what his room looked like, I murmured as I turned slowly through the space. Of course, it would be decorated with monster heads and armor, but I didn't expect it to have paintings from when he killed them too. This room was mine now, which felt strange. But surrounded by all those monster heads, it was hard to relax. Well, no time to sleep the day away. That will come when I can finally relax with the peasants' taxes. Only then will I sleep until there's no tiredness left in me, I said with an ironic smile. I headed for my father's study. There was much to do. I immediately sat at the dark wooden desk, the surface cluttered with papers, letters, and documents requiring my attention. I ate something quickly while flipping through the papers, well aware that time would not wait. I needed to review the documents related to my family's finances. I glanced at the coffers and began doing calculations in my head. Let's see what we've got, I muttered, beginning to go through the records. The family coffers held a total of 2,243 gold crowns, a considerable amount, though not enough to live in luxury until my death. As expected, the gold came from several sources. After deductions and the 25% sent to the Prince of Altdorf, the family's net income came mainly from peasant taxes, which no longer surprised me. It was a reliable source, but the money was distributed in a way that always made it feel like it wasn't enough, especially since the taxes weren't stable and depended entirely on the harvest. Aside from taxes, my income came from various goods, which couldn't be underestimated. The family mill provided a steady income, and the commercial licenses issued within our lands also helped keep the treasury filled. However, the standout, the real moneymaker, was the sale of horses, especially war horses. To my surprise, the sale of war horses generated enormous profits. Each one sold for 10 to 20 gold crowns, and the finest specimens auctioned in Altdorf could go for hundreds. About 500 horses were sold each year. That didn't even include the sale of regular horses, which also brought in a respectable amount of money, though not as lucrative. These were mostly sold as work animals, to well-off peasants or people in need of transport, but the income from each one was stable. At the same time, I reviewed the report from the last imperial census, conducted in the year 2285. It detailed the population of the villages under my control. Rainsfeld, my main village, had 9,000 inhabitants, an impressive number, given the region's conditions. Then there was the unnamed village governed by Rudolf in my name, with 3,000 inhabitants. Still without a formal name, it was growing slowly but remained loyal. Another village, home to 2,000 people, was under one of my knight's command. And finally, the newly established mining settlement had around 300 residents. What caught my attention in the census was the gender distribution. Men and women were nearly equal in number, with a slight edge to the women, likely a result of battlefield casualties. Altogether, the total peasant population under my rule was about 14,000, most of them working the fields, tending livestock, or laboring in the mines. While roughly 2,000 were either too young or too old to contribute actively, the vast majority were productive, keeping the economic engine running. On average, annual income hovered around 25,000 gold crowns, far more than I had initially estimated. The sale of horses proved to be by far the most profitable source of income, thanks to the massive herds my father had accumulated over the years. Each war horse fetched a high price, and the steady sale of other horses helped keep the treasury strong. The horse trade was clearly one of the pillars of the estate. But despite the income, expenses were equally high. The garrisons made up a large part of the budget. We had 400 guards, each receiving 2 silver shillings per day, plus food rations and a weekly allowance for a mug of beer. With months lasting 32 or 33 days, the yearly cost of the guards reached nearly 16,000 crowns, a considerable burden. To that, I added the annual cost of replacing military gear, which came to about 300 crowns. Caring for the horses was another major expense. Though the families responsible for the stables were exempt from taxes, they still charged 1,000 crowns per year to cover the cost of grain, horseshoes, and training. The religious cults also consumed a significant part of the budget. 2,000 crowns to the cult of Sigmar, another 2,000 to Shalaya, 1,000 to Mor, and 1,000 to Tal and Raya. These were unavoidable yearly expenses, as the cults were an essential part of life in the empire's lands. There were, in the end, 50 administrative workers between scribes and tax collectors, who cost a total of 1,500 crowns a year. And I couldn't forget the 200 crowns set aside for the stable hands and servants responsible for maintaining the stables and other minor matters. Adding all that together, the annual expenses quickly consumed over all of the total income. After all deductions, only about 200 crowns remained, money I could actually move toward other projects or emergencies. Shit! How is it possible to have so many expenses? I thought, staring at the figures in the ledger. Of course, we have more than 3% of the population under arms. How could we not have high costs? That's why there's so much spending. Father invested too much in security. I looked closer at the numbers. Over-militarized. Based on our population, we should only have 1/3 as many guards. But the excess personnel, while justifiable due to the importance of protecting the land, represented an economic burden that needed to be reconsidered. As much as I'd like to, I can't cut military expenses, or the cult contributions, and I definitely can't cut horse care, since they finance nearly everything else. I said aloud, going over the numbers again. I need the guards to protect the land, especially from that damned family. If they sense weakness, they'll take advantage of it and test me. And if the Margrave feels insulted, he might act. I can't let that happen. The first thing I need to do is improve the tax system. Revenues are stagnating. At this rate, I won't be able to sustain the guard or the cults. And if those damned merchants keep lowballing prices, we're not going anywhere. Let's see here. A purchase order for 800 crowns from the Schilderheim merchants for tools and construction materials. I paused for a moment, flipping through the documents with growing frustration. The mine, I murmured, deep in thought. Still no income. Here it is. Father was selling iron ore to a local merchant. 10 crowns per ton. What? 10 crowns? Per ton. That's daylight robbery. My voice rose unintentionally, the anger rushing in. This is giving the ore away. What the hell was father thinking? I sighed, running a hand across my forehead. Income calculations were critical. To process iron, I need a proper smelter. But building it will take time. And, above all, gold. I have to use what I have wisely. I can't waste it, but I need to invest in the right places. I muttered, rising from my chair and pacing the room, trying to organize my thoughts. The blacksmiths will need proper tools to process the iron. I'll also need wood and stone for the smelter's construction. All of that requires tools I don't currently have. I need to see what the local merchants can supply, and how much. I'd have to speak to the blacksmith personally, see how he could help me get what I needed. In the meantime, the shipment I was waiting for should arrive soon, I told myself, glancing at the papers again, frustration simmering. I sighed and sat down again, the stress mounting as I weighed each decision. The situation wasn't easy. Guards, I called, raising my voice with purpose. 2 of them opened the door almost immediately, appearing at the entrance. Bring in the tax collectors. Now, I ordered, my eyes fixed on the door. I have work for them. The guards nodded in silence, their professionalism standing out in the quiet of the moment, and they quickly left the office. Several long minutes passed before the collectors finally entered the hall, their footsteps firm and serious, their neatly adjusted uniforms reflecting the formality of such meetings. I stood watching, scanning their faces, searching for the man I expected to see, but he wasn't there. I frowned, letting out a faint sigh. What happened to one of my father's collectors? An older man, always had a nose for taxes, I asked, eyes narrowing as I addressed the group. A young collector, his face tense with nerves, was the first to answer. My father passed away 3 summers ago, peacefully in his bed, my lord, he said, almost stammering. His voice and his youth caught me off guard. It was clear he wasn't the man I was used to seeing handle our accounts. Too young, I thought to myself. And you inherited the position? I asked, my tone direct, expecting a clear answer. Yes, my lord, I was trained by him. Your lord father believed there was no one better to replace him, he replied, his voice trembling slightly. The boy was clearly nervous. It showed in how he spoke, in the way he stood. I see, I murmured, thoughtful. I glanced back at the group, noticing the differences among them. Very well, I continued, shifting my focus back to business. I know it's the start of the year and that you're only expected to keep the ledgers updated, but I'm putting you to work now. I want a full land survey of all my subjects' properties. Complete. Cadaster, I stated, leaving no doubt about the weight of the task. I stood and walked over to the table, where several family documents lay scattered, ready for review. From now on, I want every plot of land measured and tied to the imperial census, I continued. Assume each hectare should yield at least half a ton of grain, regardless of actual output. By next month, I want all farmland measured with updated information. We'll use that data for the next tax season to determine what each household owes. The room fell into silence. The collectors exchanged glances. Silent doubts passed among them. The order meant heavy work. Understood, I asked, my voice firm. My lord, I have no objections, but one began hesitantly. This will take time. We'll need more men to complete such a large survey, and with the harvest's heavy work ongoing, the peasants might resist cooperating. I know, I replied firmly, but it's imperative we do this. The tax system must be reorganized, and we can't keep operating with no idea of what each parcel produces. I need that information for the next tax cycle. I don't want excuses. The farmland must be measured, and we must ensure all production is recorded accurately. Request as much help as you need from the guards. They all fell silent. What are you staring at? I don't pay you to breathe. Get to work. Damn it, I shouted angrily, and the collectors immediately began carrying out my orders. Chapter 25. I needed to make tax collection as efficient as possible. It was the only way to ensure a stable income, since a bad harvest could destroy everything I had worked to preserve. Every season was an uncertainty, and if I failed to collect enough, the consequences would be severe. I could give ledgers to the merchants and force them to declare their earnings. Paper can't be that expensive. No idea how much it costs. But I still remember how the priest at the Sigmar Chapel guarded his scrolls like sacred relics. I murmured as I examined the documents in front of me. Calculating taxes had always been a tedious task, but a necessary one. With the land survey, I might be able to make the tax system more predictable. But first, I need to find a way to generate more income. The mine. It's not a good option. Too much work for too little profit. The real business is in processing the iron here. I stood up, my mind racing, analyzing all available options. The mine felt like a trap I couldn't escape, but processing the ore here in town would create value much faster. I needed to find a way to make that process work. I'm heading to the village. Notify a dozen guards to accompany me. I told the soldiers posted outside my office. They ran off immediately, even pushing past each other to carry out my order as quickly as possible. It didn't take long to reach the courtyard where my horse was kept, and some guards followed behind, keeping a respectful distance while watching the surroundings. I rode with determination toward the village blacksmith, thinking about everything I needed to discuss with the master smith. On the way, I passed several young men offering to make nails, sharpen knives, or fix hinges. Life in the village carried on as usual. I didn't pay them much attention. When I arrived at the forge, the heat of the fire and the sound of hammering iron greeted me. I dismounted and stepped into the artisan's workspace, where the usual bustle was underway. The air was thick with the smell of iron and smoke. Just like the first time I'd visited, the forge was full of young workers toiling without rest. They moved iron ore and coal, forged tools, and repaired anything that needed fixing. Sweat glistened on their foreheads, and their hands were black from constant labor. None of them looked ready to stop, even though the air was as hot as the metal they worked. My presence didn't go unnoticed. The apprentices and workers paused for a moment, some curious, others showing a hint of respect for the status I represented. At last, the master smith came out to meet us. His hands were blackened, and he tried to wipe them with a rag, though the grime wouldn't come off. His smile was warm, if a bit weary, like a man who hadn't stopped working in days. "My lord, it's an honor to receive you. How can I help you today?" he asked, dropping the rag and extending a hand already marked by years of labor. "I came to talk about tool production. I need to know how many you can make for me. Consider it an urgent order. I need axes. Around 300, I said, shaking my head at the sight of his soot-covered hand. 300, he repeated, wiping his forehead with a blackened hand. "I'm afraid I can't handle that kind of volume, my lord. Too much work for me and my boys to complete in a short time frame." His voice was tired and somewhat worried. "We've had a constant flow of orders from merchants, repairs to carts and other parts. If you gave me a bit more time, how many can you deliver by the end of the week?" I interrupted, looking him straight in the eye. 2, maybe 3, the blacksmith replied hesitantly. "I recently had to let go of many of my apprentices. They reached the age where they could work on their own. I only kept one, the best of them. The rest I let go. Now I'm working with only the youngest, and the backlog is growing." "And if I pay you more, how much could you produce?" I asked, assessing the situation. I needed those tools and time was running out. He shrugged, resigned. "I could do it faster, but I'd need more hands. If I had more workers, I could increase capacity." "Fine, thanks, I suppose," I said, turning to leave the forge. I walked out of the workshop. I mounted my horse and, as I rode through the village streets, I thought about how I could speed up iron production. Then an idea struck me. I remembered the young blacksmiths who offered their services on the streets, usually ignored by the local merchants. Perhaps they could help me. I turned around and retraced my steps, searching the alleys for the youths who usually offered minor repairs or smithing services. I found them quickly. There were several of them, but their work was limited and their prices too low, far too low to be sustainable. Still, I had a feeling they could be useful. I wasn't planning to waste time with them, but then one young man stepped forward, slipping past my guards and approaching me. "My lord, do you need your horse's shoes repaired? They look worn," he said, holding a hammer in one hand and a horseshoe under his arm. Asking around about the goods I was interested in buying, I began learning the local prices. The problem was, if I started haggling too aggressively, it might not reflect well on me. In fact, it wasn't very noble to haggle. Not at all. That kind of behavior might be acceptable for a merchant or a petty landowner, but not for someone in my position. What truly shocked me was how expensive paper was. 2 silver shillings for a single sheet. One sheet cost the same as paying a guard to watch over the town for an entire day. That was the market price, of course, likely half that if you deducted the merchant's profit. Another surprise. Soap. Incredibly expensive. 1 shilling for plain soap, and 2 for the perfumed ones. What worried me was that, with prices like these, most families couldn't afford quality products, which made me realize there was an opportunity here. I already had ideas for business. After all, during slow moments, especially back in Africa or Ukraine, I'd spend hours doom scrolling online, and ideas always came from that idle time. Paper production required specialized tools and machinery. While profitable, it also demanded time and investment. For now, I needed something with quick returns to cover future expenses. I couldn't sit around waiting for someone to build me a press or mold. But soap was a different story. It was incredibly simple to produce. The triglycerides found in animal fat, whether from cows, pigs, wild game, or even horses culled during warhorse training, were abundant. Ashes, when processed correctly, yielded potassium and sodium oxides. Once dissolved in water, these oxides formed hydroxide solutions. When mixed with triglycerides under heat, they triggered a saponification reaction, breaking the ester bonds and producing salt of fatty acids. Soap. Maybe not luxurious, but potentially very profitable if done in bulk. All I needed were some pots, a few cloths to strain the water from the fat, and some wooden molds, nothing more. With those basic tools, I could start producing soap. Most importantly, without needing expensive machinery or large investments. The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. It looked like a profitable business built on scraps. I was about to buy a sheet of paper to pin in the village square to find workers, but then I remembered most people probably couldn't read well. In fact, only those attending the Sigmar Chapel likely had any formal education, and most parents wouldn't send their kids to school when they could be working. So I decided to send one of the guards to shout through the village that I was looking for workers. I offered 1 shilling per day and said I needed 10 people. That was enough. Within 3 minutes, a line of peasants had formed in front of him, eager to help. Seeing how fast the response came, I headed back to the village blacksmith to buy a few pots. Fortunately, he had plenty in stock as they were common goods. I bought them without hesitation. The fat came from hunters I allowed to operate in my woods. They delivered several kilograms of animal fat. For water, we just fetched it from the nearby river. Everything was falling into place. With everything in hand, I began teaching the peasants how to make soap. I explained the process step by step. Some seemed confused at first, but quickly picked it up. I showed them how to process ash in warm water to obtain hydroxides, how to boil the fat in water and add the hydroxides to cause the saponification reaction, waiting until it thickened. I also explained they'd need to monitor the mixture over the next few hours. It needed time to cook properly. Once it thickened, they'd separate it from the water using a wooden spoon I had perforated with a knife to help drain it. Then, they'd squeeze it through cloth to remove every drop of water. Finally, they'd pour it into loaf molds so the soap could set and harden over the next 2 or 3 days. With clear instructions, the group got to work immediately, forming a small artisanal production chain. Some stirred the mixture in large pots, melting the fat, while others handled the ashes, mixing them with warm water. Coordination was key. Though primitive, the process worked. Each task was being handled properly, and most importantly, they didn't ruin the batch. It was impressive to see how, in such a short time, they managed to produce a decent batch of soap. It wasn't fancy, but the returns were more than worth the effort. For now, we only had a couple of pots on the riverbank, but this could be improved over time. I could build a more suitable structure to process materials more efficiently, increasing output while reducing effort. But for now, this basic method was more than enough. The real value in this venture lay in its simplicity. There were no major costs, and the profit from selling the soap could be considerable. Over time, I could refine the process, but for the moment, I just had to keep moving forward and selling.